On March 22nd, 2003, a seemingly innocent game of intimacy turned into a nightmare for a couple who dared to explore the depths of pleasure. As they indulged in the thrill of handcuffs and blindfolds, fate lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike. Suddenly, chaos erupted, shattering the illusion of safety and unleashing a scream that echoed through the corridors of their apartment. The silence that followed was as ominous as it was deafening. This story takes a totally unexpected turn. Unless you've heard it before, there's no way you're going to see it coming. But before we dive into the video, if you're a fan of stories about the darker side of our universe, then do yourself a favor and smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our future uploads. Sheila Davalloo was born on May the 11th, 1969 in Iran. However, during the Iranian Revolution in the 1970s, Sheila's family fled to the United States. Both of Sheila's parents were highly intelligent and worked in the medical field, inspiring Sheila to follow in their footsteps. After graduating from high school, she enrolled at the University of Stony Brook in New York, earning a degree in biochemistry. She planned to pursue a career in pharmaceuticals. Fareed Musavi, Sheila's first husband, was 7 years her senior. Later, Sheila would claim that her parents arranged her relationship with Fareed. However, Sheila's parents refuted that allegation and said they didn't even like Fareed and didn't want Sheila to marry him. Nevertheless, once Sheila married Fareed, her family did not want her to divorce him. Because Sheila's parents believed in the sanctity of marriage, they wanted her to stay with Fareed, despite their disapproval of him. While Sheila was in graduate school at New York Medical College, she met a fellow student named Paul Christos. They immediately hit it off, and soon Sheila and Paul began dating. However, Sheila was still married to Fareed, and Paul was unaware of Sheila's marital status. Paul Christos thought Sheila lived with her parents. He had no idea she lived with her husband. Eventually, Fareed found out about Sheila's affair and contacted Paul. The two met for a meeting at a cafe that was surprisingly non-confrontational. Yet, even after Paul learned the truth about Sheila's marriage, he stayed with her. After Fareed and Sheila divorced in 2000, Sheila and Paul married and moved to Pleasantville, New York, where Sheila would get a job at Purdue Pharma and Paul at Cornell University. The honeymoon phase did not last long. Sheila was extremely emotional and would burst into tears for no apparent reason. But still, Paul wanted to make this work and was willing to do anything for his wife. One example, Paul had to leave the house on various occasions. He would pack up his things and stay overnight at a hotel. Sheila had a volatile, mentally ill brother who would occasionally visit. Her brother didn't know Sheila was married, and she believed that he wouldn't take it well, so she decided to keep it a secret. Paul didn't mind. He had the weekend to himself and saw it as an act to make his wife happy. Despite their relationship not being the same as it had originally started, both Sheila and Paul had their moments. They would both talk extensively about their days, and there was one story that both Paul and Sheila were interested in. A love triangle was starting to form at Purdue Pharma. Sheila told Paul about 3 colleagues known as Anna Lisa, Melissa, and Jack. Jack was new to Purdue Pharma, and the 2 women took a liking to him. Jack started a relationship with Anna Lisa, but was seeing Melissa on the side. Melissa, being friends with Sheila, meant that she would always be up to date on the gossip, and this would be passed on to Paul. In the summer of 2002 is the point where Sheila started to tell Paul about the love triangle. The affair between Jack and Melissa really started to cool off, and Jack decided to end the relationship to focus more on his relationship with Anna Lisa. This hurt Melissa. Melissa pretended to be fine with Jack ending their time together, but in reality, she was racked with jealousy and obsession. Paul enjoyed the conversations and would always share his thoughts on what Jack should do, what Melissa should do, and what Anna Lisa should do. It became something of a guilty pleasure between the couple, but the real selling point in Paul's eyes was that both himself and Sheila were bonding over quality time together. There were points where Paul thought Sheila was getting too involved. One night, Sheila told Paul that she and Melissa had purchased a lockpick to break into Anna Lisa's apartment and asked for his night vision goggles so that they could watch her. Paul, obviously, was concerned and would always tell Sheila to put some distance between herself and the situation and break it off with Melissa because they were going to get into trouble. Ultimately, Sheila would back away. She saw how crazy things were getting. Months later, in November of 2002, a rumor started to spread around Purdue Pharma, and once people heard it, they were horrified. They simply couldn't believe what they were hearing. This rumor made its way back to Paul, who questioned Sheila, but she was unsure. At this point, Sheila did what she said she was going to do. She put distance between herself and workplace drama. As time went on, things quieted down. There was no more juicy gossip for Sheila and Paul to talk about, and thus, their relationship fell flat. That was when, on March 22nd, 2003, Sheila told Paul about a game she heard someone talking about. As part of the game, one person was bound and blindfolded and had to guess the household item that their partner rubbed against their body. After some consideration, Paul agreed to play the game with Sheila the following night, March 23rd. Sheila took the first turn. She was bound and blindfolded and had to guess the various objects that Paul would find around the house. It didn't take long for Paul to realize that Sheila was terrible at this. She would guess wrong every time. It wasn't long until she was done and wanted to swap. Paul was cuffed to the chair and blindfolded. Once Paul could no longer see or move, Sheila rubbed several items on his body. Paul, unlike Sheila, was amazing at this game, guessing all items correctly. Paul was so good that he started to hear in Sheila's voice that she was getting frustrated with how good he was. Sheila attempted one more object to try and catch Paul out. She ran from room to room, pulled out drawers, and opened cupboards in order to find the perfect object to catch Paul out. She ran back to the room, went over to Paul, and started to rub the object across his cheek. Paul took a second and felt it move across his face. He was unsure, but then he got a whiff of an ever so slight smell. He thought it might be a candle, but before he could say candle, suddenly, Paul felt a crushing pressure on his chest, and Sheila let out a loud scream. Immediately in panic mode, Paul asked Sheila, "What's happening? What's happening?" After Sheila screamed that the object she was holding had fallen and injured him, Paul asked her to remove the blindfold and saw blood. He told Sheila to get the key to the handcuffs, but she claimed she couldn't find them. In a panicked state, Paul broke the chair to get free, but still had the handcuffs on. Paul told Sheila to phone 911. He felt like he made himself clear in his instructions, but Sheila just stood there, staring back at him. That's when Paul, in a stern but clear tone, said, "Sheila, phone 911 now!" Sheila would listen and dial 911 for an ambulance. She was on the phone for a while, and Paul felt somewhat relieved. He continued to try and break free from the handcuffs, but couldn't quite pull his hand out. After a while, Sheila came in with a key and finally helped Paul. This gave him a chance to really take a look at his chest. He was in excruciating pain and still couldn't wrap his head around what just happened. But there was no time for that. He needed an ambulance. He asked Sheila how long it would be, and she said about 30 minutes. Paul couldn't understand why it was taking so long. The hospital wasn't far away. After Paul told Sheila to call again, Sheila said she had done so. But when the ambulance hadn't yet arrived, she told Paul to be patient. She said it was a busy day for the ambulance. They were out on other calls. Paul was outraged. He couldn't believe it would take 30 minutes for what is an emergency. Enough was enough. Paul demanded Sheila take him to the emergency room at Westchester Medical Center. It wasn't far away, and it would be quicker than waiting for an ambulance. Sheila would take her time finding her car keys and actually getting in her car. Paul couldn't sit up in the front seat due to the pain in his chest, and instead opted for the back seat. On the drive to the emergency room, Sheila took the scenic route, which really frustrated Paul, and to make matters worse, she even stopped the car, pulled over, got out, and opened the back door in an attempt to lay down the back seat to make it more comfortable for Paul. Paul was pleading with Sheila. Finally, Sheila made it to the hospital. But instead of driving to the ER entrance, she took them to a distant parking lot at the back of the hospital. At this point, every time Paul tried to move, he would feel this indescribable pain in his chest. He needed Sheila to help him out of the back seat. She got out and reached over, but instead of helping Paul, she pulled out a knife and stabbed him in the heart. Paul jumped out of the vehicle and grabbed the knife, throwing it into a pile of rubble. Paul saw bystanders near the door, and with the last bit of energy he had, made his way over to them. Sheila would grab hold, pulling him back and even starting to act as if Paul attacked her. Eventually, she turned around, ran back to her car, and sped out of the parking lot in her car as quickly as possible. Paul, miraculously, survived. He told the doctors that his wife, Sheila Davalloo, had attempted to kill him. When Paul's doctors asked him what had happened, he said to them that his wife had stabbed him in the chest with a kitchen knife. Sheila told the investigators that what happened to Paul was an accident resulting from an intimate game gone wrong. According to Sheila, she even called 911 to help Paul. Yet when the investigators obtained Sheila's cell phone and home phone records, they found she hadn't called 911 when Paul was bleeding to death. This seemed a clear-cut case. Paul witnessed his wife trying to kill him. He had the wounds to back it up, but what was the motive? For us to explain this, we must go back to the love triangle between Melissa, Anna Lisa, and Jack. This love triangle didn't exist, not in the way that Sheila described. There was a love triangle, and Anna Lisa was one of the parties involved, but the other two names were Nelson Sessler and Sheila Davalloo. Sheila was having an affair with Nelson. Sheila lied about her mentally ill brother. He was mentally ill, but he wasn't visiting. Instead, Nelson would come around and they would have hot, passionate sex. Nelson had no clue Sheila was married, but eventually he would break it off in the summer of 2002, just like Sheila described in her story to Paul about how Melissa was jealous. This was just Sheila sharing her feelings under a pseudonym. Sheila hated how Nelson picked Anna Lisa over her. On November 8, 2002, after work, Sheila drove down to New Jersey to visit Anna Lisa. She knocked on the door. Anna Lisa said, "Who is it?" And Sheila replied in a friendly voice, "It's Sheila. We used to work together at Purdue Pharma," all while holding a knife behind her back. The second Anna Lisa opened that door, Sheila would stab her multiple times in the face, neck, and chest. The attack was so aggressive that one of the strikes cut so deep that it would reach the back of her lungs. Sheila got so lost in the moment that, with all the blood on the knife, she slipped and cut her own thumb. After, Sheila would clean herself off, go to a nearby payphone, and tell the police a rehearsed script of her neighbor being attacked by a guy. During his interview, Nelson said he worked all day. After reviewing his building's CCTV footage, Nelson was cleared of suspicion. Investigators examined the 911 call that reported Anna Lisa's murder as they moved on to other leads. Due to the caller's claims that a man attacked Anna Lisa, they searched for a male suspect without success. The rumor that everyone heard at Purdue Pharma, and that would ultimately make its way back to Paul, was that Anna Lisa was brutally murdered. Paul questioned Sheila, asking if it was the same Anna Lisa from the love triangle, but she pushed it to the side as if she knew nothing. Paul also saw the cut on her thumb, but Sheila said she cut it opening a can of dog food. After the death of his girlfriend, Nelson was distraught. Sheila consoled Nelson after Anna Lisa's murder, and the two began a relationship again. This was when Sheila started to plan how to murder Paul. When the police would investigate Sheila, they looked through her phone. When Sheila claimed to be phoning 911 to help Paul, not only did she not phone them, but she sent a message to Nelson Sessler, inviting him to come over that night. Sheila was hoping to kill Paul and continue her relationship with Nelson. Nelson's name stuck out to police as the boyfriend of Anna Lisa, and it wasn't long before police realized both cases were linked. Investigators working on Paul's attempted murder case recognized Sheila's voice immediately when they listened to the 911 call in Anna Lisa's murder. In 2004, Sheila was found guilty of trying to murder her husband, Paul, and they divorced shortly afterward. She received a maximum sentence of 25 years in prison without parole. While Sheila was incarcerated, Connecticut authorities built a murder case against her based on the murder of Anna Lisa Raymundo. In the prosecution's case, they had the 911 call as evidence against Sheila, but they also had more evidence. The blood drop found in Anna Lisa's bathroom sink linked Sheila Davalloo to the murder. It was Sheila's blood. Sheila Davalloo was finally charged with Anna Lisa Raymundo's 2002 murder on November 21st, 2007. It took until 2012 for Sheila Davalloo to go to trial, but finally she was sentenced to 50 years in prison. Justice was served, and Sheila Davalloo was held accountable for taking the life of Anna Lisa Raymundo. Her sentence was meant to honor the life of Anna Lisa Raymundo and to ensure a repeat of her tragedy could never happen again. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure you hit that subscribe button. We post new stories every week covering the darker side of our universe. If you want to see more videos like this, then I highly recommend that you click the video now on screen. That video has been selected specifically for you. Enjoy.